Let's head to Dave Hill now. Dave, what's going on in Uxbridge and Ruislip? And tell us all about ULEZ.
Well, you've sort of answered your own question there. At least in terms of media coverage, it's all about ULEZ, as I'm sure everybody will have noticed, which is pretty weird, of course, because ULEZ is a policy under the sole control of the Mayor of London, and whoever gets to be the MP can speak for their constituents about it, but they can't do anything about it. So it's been quite weird. I was at the hustings, which is got what 10 days ago now, something like that, when Danny Beales, the Labour candidate, sort of shifted his position on ULEZ and says, I am absolutely against it. I'd spoken to him a few days before and he'd been very sort of neutral about it on the one hand, on the other. He spoke up loud and clear at this hustings at Brunel University saying, this is definitely the wrong time. I'm hearing all these heartbreaking stories. And everybody went completely mad, of course. But it's sort of bizarre, partly for the reason that I said. This isn't a national government issue as such. It's a Mayor of London issue. So it's a bit like you've got two men, Steve Tuckwell and Danny Beales, trying to be appeared the most appalled over a red herring. But it's
And
obviously
is it coming up on the doorstep, Dave? Is it a
it
big issue
seems
for
to
local
be. So
people?
when I went out there, I was shown around by one of the readers of my website who lives there, and he said it is what people are talking about, not just on the doorstep when politicians knock, uh, but amongst themselves. It's a big issue locally. And it's sort of interesting. So the other thing that's sort of odd about it is if you look at the statistics about how many people who live in the constituency, or at least in the wider borough, which is the best measure we can get of Hillingdon, and you look at how many vehicles registered there fall foul of the ULEZ standards, it's really quite a small minority of vehicles and therefore households that are affected by it. ULEZ has got quite high levels of car ownership compared with London as a whole, but there's about 20% of households that don't have a vehicle at all. And the best statistics that we have show that, and these are sort of Transport for London has looked at these and sort of handed out a sort of fact sheet to everybody about them. We probably in 2022 there were 83% of cars registered in the borough of Hillingdon, which Uxbridge and South Ruislip falls into, were already ULEZ compliant, and that was down, and that was up by about 9% from 2021. So by now, more than halfway through 2023, okay, this we could be only about 10%. So it's odd. Why is this? It could be because even people who aren't directly going to be affected by it and fall within the standards still think it's wrong. And it could be that a lot of people just haven't looked up. There's so much talk and anxiety about it. They may not have just checked yet to see whether they're involved. So it's a quite odd one as far as I can see.
It is interesting that it is interesting that it's sort of become, as you say, it's kind of caught like the imagination of everybody. It's kind of become the sort of referendum on ULEZ. Just a couple of messages in from our listeners. Someone's messaged and say, didn't Boris Johnson start the scheme when he was Mayor of London, Dave?
This is true. This is true. Very interestingly, well, he didn't start it, but he had the measure lined up during his second term as mayor.
Interesting.
And but that was only for the very centre of London, covering the same area as the congestion charge, which Ken Livingstone introduced. Okay. But Sadiq Khan made it happen a year earlier than Boris Johnson had planned to.
Oh, that's interesting too. We've also had Louise from York. She says, my mum lives in Selby. She's had 3 Labour canvassers for the child candidate. He does look very young, including Yvette Cooper. No contact from any other party. That's very interesting. Now, in the remaining minutes that we have, just before we do that, Kieran, just quickly on ULEZ, do you get the sense that this is becoming a bit of a referendum on ULEZ, this Uxbridge and Ruislip by-election?
Well, it could well do, because I think the thing you've got to remember about by-elections is that turnout is considerably less than it will be at a general election. And so it is very much motivated, engaged voters that show up at by-elections. And so I wouldn't discount completely the idea that ULEZ could mean that in some ways the Tories defy the national swing in the polls at the moment in this by-election on Thursday. The one caveat, though, I would make, and it's an important one, is that doesn't mean that sort of all other issues evaporate, such as the cost of living and the state of public services and the NHS and so on. So the Tories may well defy gravity a bit, but I think to retain the seat it completely would be something quite different.
Okay.
So it will be worth following on Thursday. But I guess the final thing I would say on this is that that's not going to help the Conservatives at a general election,
Okay.
a very London specific issue.